evaluated. And that's because basically the stack is being fully evaluated all the way to the top. Now, if I turn this button off, what Max will actually do now is only actually evaluate the stack up to the point which I actually click at. So at the moment we're at the top, so the entire stack is evaluated. I can go down to the FFD, and now the twist is actually not evaluated, so you can see it twists back slightly. If I click on the bend, the FFD will not be evaluated, or the twist. They'll just be ignored, as you can see. And if I go down to edit poly, the bend will be removed, and so on. And I can go down to teapot, and obviously we're going to see no real change there. So you can see as I click up the stack, each modifier is applied in turn. So you just got to bear that in mind. When you've got that button turned off, the stack is only evaluated up to the point that you've actually got selected. I'll turn that back on again. The next button, that's actually pretty important in the instancing workflow, which is something that we've already run through. And what that button does is it's got a dual function. The first function is that if it's active, it shows you that an element or an object is actually instanced. The second function of the button is that if it's active, you can click it, and that will actually make that object unique. So as an example, we can get this teapot, and I'll shift drag it, and I'll make that into an instance. And when I did that, you can see that this button here is actually active. And if we look at the original object, we can also see that that's active too. Now, if I didn't want this instancing to remain, I can actually go up to this button, just click on it, and now it's a unique object. And now we can actually go into any of these modifiers and change them. And you can see that the original object isn't actually changed in any way. So that's pretty cool. Let's say we removed all these modifiers, and we got one of the modifiers from here. I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to drag that modifier over to here and drop it on there. We actually got the twist modifier as well, so I'll just get rid of the twist modifier. Now you can see that this bend modifier is instanced, and if I move back and forth, you can see now that that modifier is obviously instanced between the two objects. If I go into the stack and I click on the base object, you can see that this here shows it as being unique. But when I go to the bend modifier, you can see it becomes active, and it's obviously given us a clue that the modifier is instanced, but it also means that we can obviously break that instancing by clicking on that button. So if I click on the button, it's made unique, and again I can actually change the parameters on it, and it's only going to affect that particular modifier. So as you can see, that's a very useful button when you're working with instancing. Again, as we described earlier in the DVD, it's actually possible to break instancing using MaxScript, and that can actually be a very useful feature when you actually only want to break certain instances in certain circumstances. So again, MaxScript is a very powerful tool in that particular area. The last button in terms of functionality is quite simply a remove modifier button. So it only removes the currently active modifier. So we'll just get rid of this object, and I'll put a few more modifiers on here. Let's go for edit normals, and then let's go for another FFD, and then we'll go for a mesh smooth on top of that. And let's say I didn't want the twist, I can just go down to the twist and I can get rid of that. Let's say I didn't like the edit normals, I can just remove that. The FFD4, I don't like that, I can remove that as well. So as you can see, you can actually just select individual modifiers and actually remove them using that button. You can also hold down Shift and do multiple selections, and you can remove those just as easily. So as you can see, you've got some pretty cool little tools here for working with the stack, and that allows you to build, make objects unique, remove modifiers, and so on. Now, one last element of the stack which a lot of people miss out on for a number of reasons, and that's mainly because it's not actually accessible via these buttons here or by these elements here, and that's actually the ability to not only turn off our modifiers, but to actually turn off our modifiers either in the viewport or at render time. And that gives us a lot more flexibility in what we're actually doing with our stack, and I'll give you a quick demonstration of how that works. So we'll go up here and we'll create a box, There we are. And what I'll actually do is I'll do a little bit of poly modeling with it. So I'll actually put an edit poly modifier on there. And we'll go into the box and I'll do some very, very basic modeling here. This is nothing exciting, believe me. We'll just extrude this outwards a little bit. I'll extrude these out some. There we go. One more time, I think. And I'll just select those two edges there. And I'll just create a bridge in there. And I think I'll just taper that a bit. We'll put some segments in. There we are. Okay, I think that's fine. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to put a modifier on here. Turbo Smooth. There we are. That's obviously subdividing the surface and making it into a smoother surface. And there's two ways we can actually handle this particular problem that we've got here. And I'll show you the two different ways and you can get a good idea of how flexible the system is. Now, when we're working with this object in the viewport, we may not necessarily need to see all this geometric detail, and that's a very common thing when you're working with characters. So what you can actually do is you can go up here and you can turn the modifier off. But obviously the problem with that is at render time you do want to actually see all that geometric detail. So if we actually create a render of what we have at the moment, you can see that we've got a very, very, very basic object, and it's not necessarily what we want really. So I can go back in here and I can turn on Turbo Smooth again and we can do another render. And now, as you can see, we've got a smoothed object, but of course in the viewport we've got this smooth object as well. So this is where these toggles come in. The option, if we right click here, you can see we've got four different options. We've got the modifier on, at the bottom we've got the modifier off, and those two very simply correspond to this light bulb button here. So it's pretty crude control really, it's either on or off. But you can see the other options we've got, which are much more useful. We've got off in viewport, which means obviously the modifier is off in the viewport, but it's on in the render. And then the other option is it's off in the render, but it's on in the viewport. So that's really cool. That means that we can have our smooth only in the render and actually have it crude in the viewport. So in this case we want to have the modifier off in the viewport. There we are. And now, as you can see, it's off in the viewport. When we do a render, it's nice and smooth. So that's really, really cool. We've actually got the option of having two different states for any modifier. Now let's say we turn that on, and let's say we'd collapse this mesh and it was there wasn't anything we could do about it, and it was very, very heavy, and we really didn't need to see that kind of density of mesh in the viewport. So this is what we want to actually see at render time, let's say. And as I said, it's a collapse mesh, so let's do that. We'll just convert it to a edible mesh. And we really can't actually turn off the modifier now because there's no modifier to turn off. But what we can do is we can go in and we can use one of the optimization modifiers. So we can actually crank this up quite a lot. Let's say we really optimize it big time, so in the viewport we've got much less polygons now. Don't forget this is a set object, and nobody ever goes anywhere near it, but at render time we want it to be, you know, full quality. So we can actually now do a render, and if we look at this modifier, it's just on. If I do a render, we get this very crude geometry. So now we can use this opposite option to the one we just used, and that is off in the render. So we want the modifier to be on in the viewport but off in the render. So I'll choose that option now. And now if we do a render, we get the full quality geometry, as you can see, nice and smooth. Whilst in the viewport the modifier is still active and we have this optimized geometry. So as you can see, we've got four different states that any modifier can be in. It can be off, it can be on,